Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name's Danielle Mezzanato, and I'm your Speaker Series Coordinator. I just want to remind everyone that today's Slido code is hashtag #BeHappy, so please go on and log your attendance for this lecture. And if you have any questions during the talk, please put them in the chat box. We're looking forward to asking your questions to our speakers at the end of the talk. I'm going to pass it over to your incoming Speaker Series Coordinator, Julie Coleman.
Hey everyone, I just want to give a quick introduction to Todd Johnson. So most of you all know Todd. He's our professional practice associate professor at Utah State in our department. He got his undergraduate degree from our department in 1976 and also attended Harvard for his master's degree. He practiced professionally since 1976 and was a partner in 2 design practices. And I'm going to turn it over to him to introduce our speakers today.
Thanks everybody for attending. It's a great pleasure to have Gina and Brie with us today. I met Gina Ford about 9 years ago. It was in the conference room of the president of the University in Nebraska. We were there doing a master plan for a street in the downtown called P Street. And I don't remember the president or the facilities manager as much as I remember Gina's amazing presentation of a master plan for the university. Subsequent to that, Gina and Brie Hensold forged a partnership around ideas and commitments for equity, sustainability in the landscape through the embrace of public involvement. And I'd say public involvement is very topical these days and can be a very scary proposition. But to plant a stake and call a firm agency, I think, is a bold stroke. Agency is both a potent word and a high aspiration. For me, it suggests creating the capacity to do great projects and to create bold statements and to make a difference in people's lives. Both of these ladies know a little bit about us out here in the West. Brie is a frequent visitor to Park City and the Uintas, as well as both of them have sort of vacation interests, but also professional interests in projects in the Bozeman area. So whereas we wish that they could come out and visit with us directly, we hope that they'll come in the not too distant future and spend some time at Utah State. So we're grateful for your time with us today and very curious to hear your thoughts and aspirations, and of course, see some great work. Thanks for coming.
Thank you so much, Todd, for having us, and to the great team who brought us here, who have handled getting us here really magnificently. So thank you so much. We're so excited to share the work of agency. And Todd, you kind of nailed it. That's sort of a little bit, so you said I stole your intro. You kind of got our intro. I talk a little bit about why we named our company agency, but we'll talk about that in a moment. So I'm Gina Ford, and I'm joined by my business partner and better half, Brie Hensold. We're going to tell you tales of agencies' first years of business and the kind of work that we're doing, focused on exactly what Todd kind of mentioned in his introduction. How do you make purposeful, positive change? We see design as a really critical tool in making change. And it's been an ongoing conversation that Brie and I have been having now for, I was thinking, Brie, 12 years, 13, 14 years, something. We've been working together, and we share lots of things, but what we share a long conversation around is really this idea that the intersection of planning and design is an important moment for change in communities, and that there's a really important role for us to play. So we talk a lot about what change looks like in communities. This is our little sort of mission statement for the evening. We'll talk a little bit about where we see the world changing and what we see the role of design is in that as an agent of change. Talk a little bit about how we're thinking about changing practice to really address contemporary needs, and very important and near and dear to us as a women-led business, how we also want to change the way we practice as a gender-just business, and one that really celebrates female leadership and leadership and diversity in all of its forms. So we always have this idea about sort of managing change in the background of our work for the many years that Brie and I have been working together. And I don't think there has ever been a year maybe with as much change as 2020 between the pandemic, the racial justice movements, which actually took place in some of the places we're working. This middle image is Franklin Park, where we're working on a master plan and a kind of a peace march there that happened earlier in the summer of 2020. And political change. These are really important forces, and we see our first female and first multiracial vice president. So a kind of moment of change for the country in terms of political change. And so we like to think about what we can do to work with communities to make change purposeful and positive and shared by many. And so in our work, we've talked a lot about climate change and the role that climate change has in communities, doing work together in Cedar Rapids, Iowa after its flood, with Rebuild by Design on the New Jersey shore, and really thinking about the post-Sandy resilience issues there. And we love when we work with the community to build an awareness of what resiliency will mean and learn from them what resiliency means for their community. In the case of Asbury Park here on the Jersey shore, part of our engagement strategy was around a parade that actually incited the community to want to make resilient change and run as a platform, a kind of a resilience platform for local government, which they won, and now have been really doing some incredible work even long after we're gone. And I think that's really meaningful and was a really meaningful moment for us. We've worked throughout the mountain region. This was an image shot during our Denver game plan. We worked on the strategic plan for the Denver Parks and Recreation System, 53,000 acres, in a place that's changing rapidly. And so a lot of what we talk about is how is culture changing? What are the demographics of a place? Where is growth happening? Where are the needs being met for the community and where are they not? And how do we facilitate a design process that allows communities of different languages, of different backgrounds, of different cultural backgrounds to really come to the table and share their best and tell us about what they need so we can help realize it. And we also talk a lot about gender in our work. I think, being women, running a woman-owned business, but also caring very deeply about 50% of our population that is often underrepresented in design. We think it's really rich terrain for design to be an agent of change. And part of the way that's manifest was really following the Women's March of 2017, a kind of interest we had in talking about democratic space and how important it is to think about protest, peaceful protest, really being part of kind of a democratic ideal, and how important that is to our sense of democracy. So there are these really incredible moments of change that we think about consistently. And then we think, as Brie will tell you, that design and planning are really important parts of that change.
Thank you, Gina. So as Gina said, we had spent about 14 years working together, and I think we slowly started to feel like there was something a little bit different about working together, both as women leading projects, but also as this this union of planning and landscape architecture. And so we got to work across the country on projects from flood resilience and recovery planning in Cedar Rapids to the Rebuild by Design competition that Gina showed, which again was kind of helping a community navigate out of a post-disaster moment, but with optimism and with strength for the future. And also kind of this magic that would happen when a plan would happen for a city like on the right in Raleigh, North Carolina, a community we've really come to love, where I got to work on a downtown plan with landscape architects as part of the team. And then we seeded this idea of a renovation that was really needed within the center of the downtown of a park, and Gina got to build it. And so we had been working side by side and kind of in locked arms for a long time, and felt that there was something really different to the engagement, to the ideas, and to the outcomes. And we also felt like it was different than the typical process, right? I use the word that a plan seeded landscape architecture project, and that happened. And that's really kind of what we see typically in interdisciplinary practice, which is common. And we were really lucky to work within a great interdisciplinary practice for a long time. But this idea that planning is something that happens upstream, it sets up development, or it seeds public realm projects. And engagement is something that's kind of episodic along the way. You check in with the community, you confirm your ideas, and then you might, as the plan comes to an end, you kind of have to go through this period of a pause, right? Where fundraising happens, political alignment happens, and then maybe these ideas that you'd set up would get built years down the road. And I think that that happens a lot and works, but we also thought that it kind of undersells the strength of bringing together planning, landscape architecture, and engagement. And so what we've created in agency is, we hope, a place where these things are happening constantly on every project, really in parallel, and not one is first and another is later, but they're constantly informing each other. And even beyond that, on a single project, they let us move between scales. And so as Gina was saying, you know, with the Denver project, where we're trying to understand major demographic shifts that a community might be experiencing, the planning perspective can really unpack that. But it doesn't matter if we don't also have a lens on how that impacts use, experience, and identity on the ground. So we really felt like these two things need to come together in a new way that's much more integrated, much more reciprocal. And then that's really the only way to get to some of the outcomes that, as we see our communities in change, they really need to have resilience, more cultural expression, longevity, and benefits that are equitable. And we thought that, you know, maybe you couldn't do that in a typical practice. And so we would try to break out on our own. We would give it a shot, and we would try to build a business model, a model of practice around working in that different way and working on largely public sector work. That's also a commitment that we've made, and sort of a stake we put in the ground, that we are here to work for communities, to work for cities, and to build public places. And so you're seeing now the scrappy agents who came along for us, who trusted us and came along for the ride. You'll see the work of them in all the projects to come. And as Todd said, agency became a really important word for us, this idea that it is the inherent capacity of people or beings to act in any given environment. And that really resonated with us because it feels so aligned with planning and design, right? That planning helps people have agency by removing barriers that might not let them exercise it. That design is an act of optimism. And so that agency in those actions can be really positive, can be really purposeful, and can help us as a society, right, move in a good direction. And we saw that and felt that in a lot of our project work that we were building on. This is the 2 decades of practice that Gina and I had built together and apart in our years leading up to creating agency, whether that's, you know, transforming the Chicago Riverwalk, a project that Gina led. That was for around a decade, right?
Mm-hmm.
We worked on that to really change the experience and use and ecological health of that place, or cultural planning, downtown planning, and activation of public space. In all of those cases, I think we saw that there were people who were championing the projects, the ideas, and we couldn't do them without the agency of the community. And that agency of the community is really important to us, so important that community engagement, as you saw, was a thread that's kind of at equal level with planning and landscape architecture to us. We see it not as something that is necessarily in service of those disciplines, but something that helps to elevate design, doesn't hold it back, something that can move planning forward to new ideas that we alone couldn't have come up with. Mm-hmm. And we try to do that in really creative ways that makes the process fun, really immersive, and that is really part of design. We also, you know, have been told at moments in our career, and these were compliments, and we take them that way, that, you know, we were selected because it was a difficult community engagement problem, and people thought that women would be particularly advantaged to do that type of work, brought a certain sensitivity or listening skills. These are things that we had been told. And so there was a moment where we looked up and we looked around at all the work that was on our plates in front of us, and all of our clients, almost all of our clients, are on this page, right? And they have something in common too. It was women taking a leap of faith on women to do really complicated projects like the Chicago Riverwalk, or like the Chinati Foundation's first master plan. And these are the people who took that leap of faith. And these are also the people who in their own communities had that faith put in them and were building incredible places. And so when we created agency, those same women stepped up and hired a young, brand new firm to take on some really incredible projects across the country. When we first started in 2018, we got to jump right in with a park system master plan in Greensboro, North Carolina, with the Highline Canal master plan, an incredible effort for an incredible place in Denver. With the riverfront project in Indianapolis, we'll show you. And also our first solo win as agency in Bozeman, Montana, where my folks live. So it was particularly fun to go home for that one. And we built since then that kind of small portfolio really helped us grow quickly. You know, once we were able to demonstrate that agency could do work at that level. We've since been able to build this kind of broader portfolio that we've been working on for the past 4 years, almost 4 years, across the country. And we continue to try to have this mix of planning and landscape-driven projects. And so we'll show you today a few examples of that. And what's been part of the ability to work in so many places in so many different ways was that we were really open at the start to changing how we practiced, and part of that being how we teamed. And so we felt that as a small firm, we could be really nimble and we could think differently about our roles on projects, right? We didn't always have to be the leading lady, as you can see, where we're the prime contractor and we have a team. We had a lot of different options and we tried to really play those out. We could also kind of have a joint venture, or what we were calling a marriage, right? Where you're hand in hand with another firm working side by side, and you kind of have to put your ego off to the side a little bit more and let them lead sometimes, and they'll let you lead sometimes. We'll develop partnerships with clients that are much more kind of in service of a client vision. And sometimes we'll also walk on and take a really small role for a project that we love. So we'll show you how that has really opened up the doors to different types of projects. And we'll do that through 3 themes. So the first is about uncovering cultural memory. And I'll talk about the Franklin Park Action Plan in Boston. So Franklin Park, if for those of you who don't know, it's Boston's largest park, located right in the geographic center of the community. It's about 500 acres and it's an Olmsted Park. This is one of those projects where we did a partnership, right? So we teamed up with Reed Hildebrand and Mass Design Group. And so Reed Hildebrand is the prime contractor, but we set it up as kind of a 3-legged stool, and we're really hand in hand working with them, with agency focusing on the people side of things, programming, engagement, and really thinking about that side of the house. One of the things that I don't know if we have a slide lag. One of the things that happened with this project, which has been going on for about 1.5 years, was last spring when the George Floyd movement happened. Suddenly, as Gina showed, the park was activated in a different way, a place of a very peaceful engagement and marches through it for people protesting on that event. And it really changed in our mind kind of the role that this place played and has always played for the community. So you can see we looked at this project through the lens of history, through the lens of community, through the lens of connectivity and ecology, lenses that we'd already brought to it, but suddenly with new light. And so that meant, I think when we started this project, we looked at it as an Olmsted landscape, and one that had been eroded slowly over time. You can see here the changes to the park and the kind of what we talked about, the unmaking of an Olmstedian plan. And we thought that that was the problem to solve. But realizing last spring instead that this park had histories that were not just about Olmsted, right? They were about a whole community, a community of activists, the Massachusetts tribe who was there before, people like Elma Lewis who grew a theater community within the park, and really something that lives on with a lot of pride today. And so we realized that we'd been amplifying one voice when instead there were many, many voices that needed to be part of the storytelling of the history. And likewise, when we looked at connectivity, we thought both about the kind of physical connections on the grounds. This is very much about how you get around the park, trails, can you drive there, where do you park, but also about the kind of community connectivity and the differences that you can see on two sides of the park, right? It's really race and income are very inverted, and they're very segregated. Boston is one of the most segregated communities across the country, and this is a place where that really plays out. And so it's been really important for us to think about improvements that always keep that front of mind and are always about equity. And part of that too is related to ecology, right, and public health, and thinking about the natural systems of the park, not just through the kind of Olmstedian lens and engagement, but also about today within the setting of the pandemic and the importance that ecosystem health has for kind of human health, but also for human comfort within the very center of the city. We thought about community through the lens of the people using the park, as well as trying to broaden it more. So this is a look at all the programs that take place in Franklin today, and you can see that it's really clustered in the center. And so as we've gone through this pandemic winter, we've seen the absence of places for people to be outside. It really thrived in the summer and served an incredibly important purpose during this tough time, but it's kind of shut down now. And so on the other side of this plan, could we imagine how the park could work better at all times and how that could really better service the community?
So I think I clumsily skipped over a really important slide in Brie's narration. Sorry, we had a little lag there, Brie. I apologize. But one of the really amazing things that happened in Franklin Park is that when we entered the project, it was called the Franklin Park Master Plan. And during the racial justice movement, there was a questioning about the name of the plan shifting to become instead an action plan to connotate really kind of investment in the community, kind of giving them, again, making sure there was agency, and moving away from the problematic word master. We love these two stories together because they're really about this idea of past histories and what histories you see and which ones you don't. This is Independence Square, formerly, when we started the project, named Polk Park. But during last year, it was discovered that Thomas Polk was a slave owner and had some really tough histories. And so the client is actually rebranding this Independence Square, which is actually a broader name for the landscape that it sits in. This is a third of an acre plaza, so a very different scale than Franklin Park and some of the other work we do, right in the center of, right in the 100% corner of uptown Charlotte. And so at the intersection of Trade and Tryon, which are the two main kind of Native American routes that originally started this city. Really beautiful project for a burgeoning design firm like ours. When we came to the project, what we understood of this space is that it had been a failure of an open space, that it had been sort of a place where people just sort of loitered. There wasn't anything interesting to do. There was no activation. There was this big fountain. It was partially broken. It was really dark. It's kind of a very classic tale of sort of postmodern landscapes, that the idea was, let's kind of remove this fountain and start fresh and create a great space for uptown Charlotte in this little kind of tiny corner. And so that was one story that got surfaced, was that initial story. And you could see that when you came to this place. It was in fact cluttered. It was hard to maneuver around because of some design decisions. The planting wasn't very well maintained. A lot of the infrastructure was aging. And so it was a hard open space. It wasn't being programmed in any interesting ways. And so we can completely understand that reading, but as we dug into this place, working closely with Fluidity designers, who are our favorite fountain designers, and the Cultural Landscape Foundation with Charles Birnbaum, we came to understand that the fountain was much more than what we could see in its kind of current condition. This fountain was actually designed by Angela Denejeva, who was an immigrant to the country, to the United States, who came a sculptor who had done a lot of stage design in her home country, had come here and had come to work for Lawrence Halprin, and had quickly become his lead designer on what are known as his masterworks, Freeway Park and the Ira Keller Fountain. And so she was really at the hand that helped to shape those experiences, quite literally being the stone sculptress who made those spaces that we associate with Halprin so strongly. Kind of speaks to us too, that she left that practice to start her own practice, and Independence Square was one of the first commissions she had. And one of the first commissions we can find in Charlotte, certainly, of a woman leading a major civic space right at the heart of an American city. At that time, it was the late 80s, so it was somewhat rare in its own self. And as we got to know the fountain, and as our consultants told us, it was truly a masterwork that had just gone kind of unrecognized, unmaintained. And so quickly we came to understand that our role here was really to bring the fountain back to its former glory, to really make it a sustainable water system, but to really address some of the issues of clutter that had taken over this landscape. So this is a kind of conceptual site plan that we're in the middle of moving forward now into design development. But the idea was really to preserve that fountain, the kind of iconic cascade that you saw at the beginning that really is the hallmark of this work, to remove a lot of the pieces in the foreground that had been kind of added over time or minimize the amount of accessibility and functionality of the space, putting in a new seat wall that moves through the space, kind of creating a stage at the fountain. So the fountain kind of becomes a backdrop to the public space, and a clear, open, well-graded plaza that really allows for lots of different kinds of use. So we imagine, you know, on a daily life that this could become a place where there's more lunch crowds, there'll be more seating than there is today, more openness to be able to allow a ground plane to be occupied by folks. You see the social distancing diagram on the bottom left, which was new at the time when we did it. And then the idea that there could be also markets and performances and kinds of spectacle made of the space if it were just given the kind of clarity of form and the scale needed to be able to do those things, and working closely with the client to enable that. So in our vision for this space, the fountain, as you see on the left, stays, it's renovated to contemporary standards. It's made interactive so that it becomes actually something you can engage with physically as a water feature. And then it sits within this new landscape of hopefully like beautifully cut stone and detailing that really comes to the level of Dinejeva's work, giving it a setting that again sort of surfaces it as a gem, but really welcoming new kinds of public life and public use. And so here you see that idea that the fountain has this kind of complicated geometry up at the top of this kind of spilling pools, and on the bottom, really thinking about kind of streamlining it, keeping its iconic elements, but really letting this kind of new interactive experience come to bear at its base. We also imagine, as Dinejeva is this sort of sculptor and stage designer, that we can imagine the fountain actually as this kind of stage set, this backdrop to civic life. And by elevating the ground in front of the fountain and creating this new platform, it's a seat wall during kind of everyday, day-to-day use, but then it can become this kind of performance space for the community where the fountain in our most wildest dreams becomes part of the kind of performance that's happening. And maybe there's even art pieces that engage with it over time.
We'll move to our second topic area about reclaiming underutilized spaces and a couple of projects that show that. And again, hopefully we won't give you whiplash because we'll be looking at projects now zooming back out to 58 miles and then 30 acres in Indiana and Atlanta. So, you know, I think Gina talked about how the first projects we really honed in on words and how they matter, words and names. And I think that's important here too, because when we talk about reclaiming underutilized spaces, which is within the dialogue of a lot of landscape and planning, you know, we look for where there are opportunities, right? We forget sometimes that places that we might think are underutilized are really well-loved or used in a different way by the community. And that's what we see community engagement as helping us surface, like you can see with this incredible memory that we learned really early on in the White River Vision process about a place that the White River that had become degraded over time, but really meant a lot to the community before. And this project was about stitching together two counties, so 58 miles long, like I said, but a huge geography of difference from Hamilton County to the north and Marion County to the south, which centers on Indianapolis, and trying to think about what are the pieces, how could the river be a rallying call for all the very different communities, needs, and aspirations along it. And one of the things that we really always find is a common theme for everyone, no matter how they feel about development, no matter how they feel about parking, is the environment, right? And I think in all surveys, we see that the idea of having clean air, clean water, clean land, that's what people are looking for. And so we look to partnering with an ecologist, and an engineering team who could really help us think about how this project could continue to move the White River towards a healthier place. You can see how over time, industrialization and infrastructural treatment of the river had really dramatically had a big impact on habitat and on the species that had been there initially. So how we have that big drop off of fish species in terms of number and as well mussels. So it became a big rallying call to kind of use those as indicators to move forward and plan for a plan that was for them as well as for the people. I have a lag. I don't know if others do. Thanks. And so it meant imagining places where people also could think about engagement with the water, so that that continued to be an ethos that would carry forward for future generations, right? That we would continue to have that ability for nature to be a rallying call among people with really different political alignment or other beliefs. We also know, though, that it's not always that simple, right? You can't just have kind of one aspiration, one kind of vision that ties people together. You do have to get down on the ground and work out, how do we really implement this? And we were talking about a plan for 58 miles where there were a lot of private land ownership as well as public land ownership adjacent to the river. And very early on in those public meetings, we learned that this plan was a threat to many of the private landowners who in the northern area were kind of longstanding generational farms who were really proud of their relationship to their river, their stewardship of the land, and didn't want to see that change. We're afraid of more people on water or on trails along it. And so we had to come up with a plan where, again, the river was at the center. You can go to the next slide. The river was at the center again, and the kind of thread that connected people together. And there were places along it where you could get out, you could engage, you could have bigger kind of spaces that were gathering places or development. But we also honored those kind of threats that people brought up and found ways to work around and still have a connective system. Like we saw in Franklin, places are never monolithic, right? And so we always look and try to understand what is the setting of the community that we're working in, and what are we bringing to it, what are they bringing to it. And so you can see here that there's this kind of gradient of a really diverse community within Indianapolis around the river, moving up north, becoming increasingly less diverse. So that was one factor to work with, but we were also really interested here that whereas Franklin Park was a divider east-west between these different communities, the river here was actually not that way. It was a mirror on either side. So already in terms of demographics, it was a connector. And we use that as a strength throughout the project, but also to inform how we thought about engagement, always looking at ways to engage both sides of the river, but engage top to bottom and think about geographic equity and parity across the planning of the engagement. And one project came up to the forefront towards the end of the plan that really helped to kind of drive home this idea of public investment, kind of seeding a project with a larger plan. And this is a dam kind of right near downtown Indy that during the course of the project breached and failed. And so was going to have to be addressed in one way or another. And the city rose up to the occasion. The partners on the plan rose up to the occasion and put forth a proposal to the energy company who was going to rebuild the dam to do it in a way that would allow for a free-flowing river, that idea of rallying around ecological health, rallying around this other idea of activation and bringing people to the river, as well as equity, because it was adjacent to one of those neighborhoods that had been historically disconnected after having had a relationship for so long. So this project came at the end as sort of a catalyst, but also one that brought together all of the ideas throughout the project.
Okay, jumping scales again, which is kind of our theme, if you didn't pick that up already. This is a 25-acre park in Atlanta, Georgia, on the southeast side, and we had the great pleasure of teaming with Perkins and Will, who have a pretty significant compared to us, landscape practice there in Atlanta and a really significant architectural practice across the world. And so as we were talking about this idea of new partnerships and new models of practice, partnership with Perkins & Will has been really productive for us. It allows us to do a kind of design lead role. We're the prime consultant here, but we share everything with them 50-50. They are helping to manage the project and enable us to do a really complicated construction project. So a very, as Brie was saying, I'm sure there are histories here we can't see in this image, but we do see a lot of histories, the industrial history of this kind of part of the city, the power line running through it, kind of an effort to make a public park of this space, including some soccer fields, but rather, I think, inelegantly nested into this site, not really a cohesive vision. And so we were really excited when this came out as an RFP, and really excited to work with Perkins & Will in particular, because they had been part of the system of the Atlanta Beltline, who was the client here. And for those of you who don't know the Atlanta Beltline system, it's a huge transformation of a 22-mile long ring, kind of rail to transit-oriented development corridor around the community of Atlanta, kind of vast area. And Perkins & Will with field operations had done the original master plan for the conversion of that trail. They had implemented some of the pieces. They knew the client, they know the place really well. But this 25-acre park was something they didn't have that vast portfolio of public park spaces. So it was a kind of perfect marriage. And the project is in this lower right-hand corner. You see here this little green 25-acre, looks tiny at the scale of Atlanta, but a really significant park opportunity for us. And we were really thrilled to win this project with that partnership. The design process has been really incredibly beautiful, and it's been a really nice moment where Brie really led the community engagement on the Boulevard project, working closely with our friend Stephen Gray, who does a lot of equity-based engagement strategy and implementation. And as we mentioned at the beginning, we love thinking about ways of making the community have fun with engagement, that it's not just tell us about what you want in the park with words, but it's some combination of giving them a tool. So in this case, we designed these custom stamps that each had a different program for the park. And then we designed a series of these scenes in the park, kind of current images of the edge of the park, of the meadow, and let them show us what were their kind of highest priorities for uses, what could they imagine. And then it gave us both kind of quantitative data and qualitative data, and that we could see what the community really needed. And that program array and those kind of uses and activities became the basis then for 3 different design visions that each said, okay, here's what you said you want to experience in this park. Here are 3 different physical ways of achieving that. You know, could it be that we have this kind of terraced hillside? There's 100 feet of grade change across this landscape from top to bottom. So it needed to have a topographic strategy. Is it a dispersed model of those kind of public park programs? Is it instead a kind of neighborhood park along the southern edge, which is really the streetscape that then connects through a naturalized landscape to the Beltline system? So it's a little bit more sided. Or is it something where we really do something bombastic with this kind of high ground and do this kind of large gathering space at the top that then terraces down to a more activated neighborhood park at the bottom? And this is really common in our work, that we love to present very different ideas, in some cases with the same program or the same values driving it, but showing the community how it can be done different physically. And so what we've been working towards ever since, we're in the kind of at 70% construction documents. This project has gone through lots of hills and valleys, quite literally, is this plan, which is, I think, a really beautiful demonstration of that community program, landing this kind of highly active community program pieces up at the high spot where you have these long views to Atlanta and this direct connection to the Beltline, this kind of naturalized landscape of wet meadows that carry stormwater through the park and planted slopes, and then an event lawn and a soccer field that really can become the kind of gathering space for this community. And here we are looking back. So really the biggest challenge of this project has really been that power line, which sets up a whole bunch of really complicated topographic moves that I won't bore you with, but trying to make a cohesive landscape that really fits around all of these existing constraints and conditions and creates the seamless connection between the Beltline and the community was really the driver.
So zooming back out again for our last set of projects, I'll start by looking at the city of Detroit, and Gina will talk about Sarasota, 2 projects that are both about resilience, but in really different ways. Detroit, we came at this project, I think from the lens of economic resilience, right? Detroit has really tried to figure out how do they as a city, a physical city, rebound and change and transform after such dramatic kind of population loss and economic loss. And part of that has been this idea of land-based projects or putting vacant properties back into community hands and into productive use. And so the idea always is, right, that the end result looks like this, a beautiful mural and a well-tended garden that you would be really happy to live next door to. But that's not really, as we know, what the outcome usually is. And so we came in to kind of look across the whole system and think about how do we make it work better. So this is a snapshot of where Detroit was when we started. They had done an inventory in 2014 to understand that they had 40,000 vacant houses that they needed to demolish. And so they were in the process of doing that. When we started in 2019, they had demolished 20,000 of those, so about half. And they had put a lot of that land back into the community hands. And by putting it into community hands, that it had been transformed from what it was, residential, homes within these neighborhoods, into now farms, solar arrays, arts and cultural installations, or stormwater gardens. Really different appearance for a neighborhood, right, that once had a kind of facade of homes. And so the question that we were asked was, how do we make this process work better? The city had never really planned and developed its systems to think that it would have 20,000 sites of urban farming across the city, and also within it, these other kind of questions of how do you regulate it? How do you make sure that we use the term kind of good neighbor, that these sites are good neighbors to their residential neighborhoods that they were nesting within? And how do we make them successful businesses too? How do farmers scale up so that it could become something that is a sustainable economy as well? It was a really fascinating project to get into. And part of that was about kind of letting the users be the experts. And so our engagement there was really one-on-one with the people who had over the past 5 years taken on care of these sites and now understood where the process worked and where it didn't and could tell us. And part of that was that it was really difficult to acquire the land and then go through permitting and go through design in a way that made it legal. People didn't have the skills to draw a plot plan. They didn't understand how to interpret the zoning. Urban agriculture doesn't even exist as an allowable use within the city of Detroit zoning. And so while we weren't there to rewrite it, we were there to say, how do we use the existing zoning as a tool and make something that can walk people through that in a much simpler way, in a much more affordable way. And so we created these guidelines that really took all the different pieces of the zoning code from all the different land uses and chapters and pulled them together to what was applicable to an urban farm or to a land-based project, putting it in one place so people could know really clearly and in an illustrated way what they were allowed to do, what they were encouraged to do, and how they could participate and be a good neighbor.
And our last project, this is the Sarasota Bay Park, which is a different part of the country altogether. This is the western coast of Florida. And this was a master planning project. I had won as the design lead just before Brie and I left Sasaki, and had the great pleasure of actually staying on as the design lead through the master plan with the Sasaki team, and then have continued to do implementation work as agency in the lead with Sasaki supporting. So a really nice kind of transitional project for us. The site is a 53-acre edge to the downtown of Sarasota as it meets the bay. This is one of the most beautiful parts of our country, looking out over the Gulf Coast, the Gulf of Mexico with the sunsets. Since this is the western coast of Florida, it's really magic, a great history of architecture. And we were brought on really to look at this very underutilized, as we described, a hard word, but underutilized property. In this case, I think, it was 70% of the site was covered in parking lots, as you can see on the left. It really came out of an era of automobile planning in the late 60s and 70s that we oftentimes find ourselves sort of questioning and challenging now. A cultural district with a lot of small pavilion-like cultural facilities, the symphony, an auditorium, the Performing Arts Center, all tied together by this kind of expansive asphalt, and all within future storm surge. So the master plan that we developed on the right was really about removing the parking, putting it actually as a floodable lower layer with this green kind of swath of park over that, creating a higher terrain that could become a more resilient space for cultural performance, for public park space, and for the community really knitting it together, as we always like to say, going from gray to blue and green as a site. And we had the great pleasure that the community and the client really got behind the idea of a first phase park, which is the southern edge of the site. A new performing arts center here will take some time, so we'll have this kind of hole in the donut. So we're going to develop the sites all around the edges while that fundraises. And so this first phase is actually under construction right now. And just to show you a few of the drawings, it's really about creating a kind of beautifully scaled community park that allows for lots of new kinds of uses that the community doesn't have on the waterfront right now. I think the signature elements are really this new concession building, which has shade and access to the park, and this spiral boardwalk that really is all about this idea of the sunset over the bay. It's kind of like with a pier met a clock, a kind of way of experiencing this, the way the sunset shifts over the horizon, and also making a kind of connection across this this mangrove inlet, as you can see, a kind of wetland there. We had the great pleasure too of actually doing kind of a phase 1A of a project that's actually in construction, finishing up right now. You can see it on our Instagram, but it's kind of an interpretive trail around that wetland as a very, very first phase. And the big idea here was really about connecting people to really beautiful and distinct moments of nature along that journey around the mangrove. So finding kind of beautiful moments of tree canopy or experience of some natural habitat, and then interpreting it in a really subtle way. As you can see, these kind of nodes, we call them learning decks or interpretive nodes along the walk. And just to show you a few of them, a moment where you have these kind of twin oak trees that form a kind of gateway into the park. We've made these custom decks that wrap around it and create seating and interpret the oak leaves. We have another moment where there's a kind of bend in the path through this cabbage palm grove. And so the cabbage palms are etched into the surface. You have this moment of kind of respite among that kind of beautiful texture. And then my favorite, the nest, this is right at the base of an osprey nest, which is up high. And so we wanted to create a nest for people where you could lay in this kind of hammock-like seat, custom seat, and look up at the osprey nest. So have this kind of connection of, you know, human and natural ecosystems and habitat. And I could tell you stories about what it's like to be monitoring a project like this from a distance during the pandemic. We have an incredible team locally there that we're working with, thank goodness, that we talk to at least 16,000 times a day to really help us through this construction. And a construction manager who's just constantly giving us day by day, blow by blow, you know, all of the kinds of like on the ground things that we normally would be there to see around samples being flown around the country to all of our different teammates, and really watching the construction unfold. But you'll see more of this project hopefully and as it's realized over the next year. So we have a few minutes or a few minutes over, but I'm just going to spend 2 minutes talking a little bit about what it looks like for us, just in closing, to be forming this new business as what we like to call a gender just practice. Brie and I are both feminists. We really believe in women having an important role in the shaping of public space and of practice. And so we've been talking a lot with our firm about what it looks like to be a feminist practice, what it looks like to be a gender just place. Having you know, known experiences, as we all do, of places that have bias and discrimination, and wanting our place to be a really comfortable and safe space for all people. And so just to end with our values, we are really, as Brie has mentioned, motivated by purpose. In the outside world, that means that we do predominantly public work in a really hands-on way with the community. Internal to agency, it means we ask our team to bring their whole selves to the office. This is a little pain index that we fill out at our IRL meetings on Monday morning. It's kind of a way of us checking in every Monday morning with the team and saying, like, where are you on the spectrum of pain? So that people can bring both their own workload problems, but also maybe some of their feelings about the pandemic or the racial justice movement or whatever happens to be happening in the world that needs discussion. We welcome that. We have commitment to each other, and again, to the kind of public work and to community, and to really understanding the needs of community, as you see with our rebuild work. We also believe in understanding the community that is agency. So really thinking about who are we? We did actually like a personality test that helped us to understand how we communicate. This is a little map of our team and kind of where they fall within that. So the idea is that we're really trying to build a team that understands how to have a high functioning environment that's high trust and is built on direct communication and sort of like good collaboration. We believe in diversity, and that means that we do everything from partnering with incredible teammates that bring diverse perspectives to prioritizing minority and women-run businesses as part of our teaming strategies. Also really important in public work, and particularly in places where we are, we're a dominant white team and we work in a lot of predominantly non-white communities. And so really making sure we can reflect community as much as possible. At agency internal to our practice, we also enlist all of our support entities are minority and women, or the great majority are minority and women-run businesses. So we really want to use our spending power in a way that supports our diversity and equity objectives. We believe in inclusion with the community, so really thinking differently about how design meets the needs. We talked about a little bit about this in the kind of student gathering before this talk about, how do you design for people with disabilities? How do you design for different cultural experience? That's core to our work. And inclusion at agency also means that our team actually participates in the making and the running of the business. We actually have different task forces that take on the different dimensions of running a business. So everyone has a hand in shaping what this business is becoming and how it makes decisions and operates day to day. We've had to be really flexible through the pandemic, but we were before. So when we were just a scrappy little team of 2 to a team that actually had a full office. We had 6 different offices as we were growing. So we know what it's like to live off of a laptop even before the pandemic. That served us well, but it's also important to a contemporary workplace. We believe in transparency with community. We also share transparently with our team all of our financial information, all of our decision-making about where we stand. And that's been really important through the pandemic as well, saying like, here's how we're doing, team. Here's what we need to accomplish in the next few months. This is what it looks like. So no one's wondering how work is going. And then lastly, we participate vigorously in community, whether it's Brie teaching at Harvard or me teaching at UT, or our participation in all of the different professional organizations and sponsoring great events that really align with our values. We believe really strongly in that. And just to make one nod in closing to the community of WXLA, which is a group I co-founded, which might speak to some of the landscape architects in the session today. This is a group that really advocates for women in practice. You can follow us on Instagram at WXLA or sign the petition at change.org, which is about women's rights and the profession of landscape architecture. So just a kind of closing piece about what we think it means to be running a women-led business in this 21st century pandemic-laden world that we're in, which is an interesting time to start a business. And so with that, we're done with our slides. And really happy for the conversation and for your observations. Thank you.
Lots of good questions already, I see.
Oh, yay. I can't see them. I'm only sharing screen. It's like a liability of being the screen share. I'm going to stop.
Thank you so much, Gina and Brie. We're just, thanks for motivating and inspiring us all with your work, and especially around social justice and community engagement. On the realm of community engagement, we have a lot of questions coming in from students. One kind of looking more towards some of your public space and park projects and you spoke to this a little bit earlier when we had a hangout, Gina, but with your planning right now in terms of public spaces, how do these protests, public demonstrations, and also social distancing really come into play when you're designing for the future and us not really knowing what the future is going to look like?
Brie?
I thought it was calling your name with the protest piece, but I'll talk a little bit about the kind of, the pandemic lens that has, I think, come into our work and over the past year, but then we see it too as we're moving out of the pandemic, right? We're thinking differently. I think instantly it was this realization of how important public spaces are. We were working in Charlotte, and our client there has an incredible greenway system, and said that use of the greenways had upticked last spring by I think 140% or something like that. And so suddenly we had places transform from something that was perceived to be for enjoyment to be really critical infrastructure. And so I think, and hope that there'll be more power, more funding, more infrastructure investment in those types of places, and people realizing the kind of public health commitment. And we certainly in our work will reinforce that, I think, much more. The other piece I would say is we're just starting some kind of the state of Massachusetts is doing some COVID recovery planning with small towns across the Commonwealth. And so we're just starting to work with small communities. And when, the focus there is really on economic recovery, but the projects and the improvements that a lot of these small towns are looking for on their main streets are streetscape, infrastructure, public realms. So it's so interesting to see people making the connection between economic recovery and public space.
Yeah, the protest piece, that was awesome, Brie. The protest piece has been super fascinating because in 2017, it was just a recognition that I participated in the Women's March in Washington, D.C. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is what we do. We make these spaces. It's happening right now, under my feet, and I was with my mom and my kid. And I was like, 3 generations of women, we're out here fighting, And it was so exciting to me. And I was sort of like, how did this, how do spaces actually perform? I did some research, started talking to landscape architects because so many of us participated in that. What did we learn from that body experience at protest that we could apply to work? And I wrote some articles and I did a TED talk. And I think the thing that was so fascinating about the protest work was that I had this fear that there's this divisiveness growing, right? And that public space is the place in our lives we have to negotiate with each other, right? Like you have to be present with each other, and that spaces can be designed for that, to enable that, and spaces can be designed to keep us apart and can be designed to actually prevent us from being democratic, right? And so watching what's played out since that talk in 2017, the insurrection in early January, even the clearing of Washington Square or Lafayette Square during the Black Lives Matter protests, these are like really important moments for landscape architects to be thinking about our role in designing and making clear the value of these decisions we make about who gets to own space, who gets to occupy it, what is peaceful, how do you enable democratic use? And so, I'm just riveted. I watch this stuff. I watch them putting up the fences around the Capitol. I think like these are not light actions. And it's to me, it's fascinating and riveting. And then to have it happening while we're all just sort of trapped in our homes, even a harder thing, right? All of a sudden you're like, oh, we can't really, acting is even harder, right? Being civic action's even harder. So it's fascinating times we live in, team. And I think that's, it's just been really amazing to watch it unfold.
Yeah, those are some really interesting insights, and I think something that's on everybody's mind right now too. I thought another really interesting part of your talk was all the community outreach work you do, and it seems like a huge undertaking. One of the questions our students had was, when you're doing this community outreach, how do you make sure that you get the unheard voices? How do you reach out to community members that are, kind of underserved and harder to reach?
Yeah, that's been a really huge part of Franklin Park, and doing it in a really rigorous way. When we started that project, we started with a survey, which is just one mode, but a way that can kind of disseminate among a broad group. And our initial response was 1,500 people, which sounds like a lot, right, for kind of like looking to get neighborhood engagement. But when we looked at the demographics, we realized that they were really skewed to that west side of the park, which I showed you was higher income and much more white dominated, and was really underrepresented on all the other sides of the park. And so we needed the collaboration, we needed the trust, and we needed to make connections with community partners who then helped promote the survey. And instantly not instantly, but within like a weekend, we got 4,500 more responses, and we almost kind of calibrated the responses when looking at demographics to be much more in line. And so that's one thing that we always do, is we kind of look at the demographics of the neighborhood and we check ourselves along the way. And if we're not where we need to be, we kind of layer on new methods. And so another way was canvassing. We did a map looking at kind of where we weren't reaching geographically and kind of lined up with demographics. And then we went door to door. This was pre-pandemic, knocked on doors and put door hangers for people to know about, kind of have more of a one-on-one touch and outreach. So both kind of, brokering trust with people who already have that within the community, and hoping that they'll extend that to you and to the project, but also just kind of getting out there and looking at where aren't you kind of meeting the need and trying to close the gap. What else?
Yeah, I was just going to say it was the same on Sarasota or Boulevard, like getting that demographic data, understanding who you're seeing and who you're not, and then finding the way to get to, I remember having to stay an extra week in Sarasota so I could be there for a Saturday church bagel breakfast in an African-American church in town, because that was like, we weren't going to get the Black community to come to this one specific place where all the meetings were happening. So, and I think the interesting thing as a public practitioner is it's high touch. It's a grind. It's, and we do it because we love it and we have a lot of integrity about the process, but it's a funny business model. You never charge a client for every hour you spend doing this work. It's really, you have to believe in it so much that you just do the work to get to the places, because it would never pencil out as a business model if you actually looked at how much effort we put into it to get to those communities. But, we believe in it. So.
Totally.
Yeah.
Two kind of follow-up questions to that. How have you guys had a lot of great photos of very tactile, experiential engagement? How has that changed recently? And are you guys also performing surveys afterwards to measure how people are using the spaces that are implemented?
Do you want me to jump in there, Gina? So I think, one of the reasons that we do this other type of outreach that is not the surveys, right? The surveys give you one type of information that's really important, quantifiable, comparable, and sortable, and can answer questions about how different communities want to use the park and make sure that we're providing that in different ways. But the reason we do this other type of more experiential, hands-on, open-ended feedback is to get at ideas like we showed for White River, right? The kind of memories or stories that you can uncover in a survey. And so it's been really important to us to continue to do that, and to be able to collect data that we couldn't imagine. So we couldn't even ask the question, right? Do you want this? We couldn't even dream it up. So there's one project that we're working on now in Portland, Oregon, which is a neighborhood plan in Northeast Portland, just across from downtown. And it's for an area that was historically Black Portland also, and a community that's been displaced. So we think of it as for that community, not for the geography, the project. But we have local team members there who are leading the engagement, and they've been super creative, even in Zoom. And they've done some things that I think we've learned a lot of lessons for. One is bringing in guest hosts from the community and really kind of like handing over the mic. We develop and kind of format it and think about what are the questions, but then it's led by community members. So that idea of, having someone who already has built trust and who has their own perspective on it, and putting our trust in them that they can also lead this process. And they've done really creative things, like on Zoom, asking people to draw their neighborhood or their island, their dream island, which was a stand-in for the neighborhood. And I think people have responded to that kind of hands-on exercise in a really different way than they have the polls or things that are kind of don't let them express things as creatively. So we've been able to still do that, just in a different way, and with a little bit more kind of magic of bringing in the community to bridge the Zoom gap, right? They might not express their feelings to me, but they will to their neighbor who's hosting this meeting.
Mm-hmm. Did we lose our facilitators?
I think we might have.
I think they dropped off. Should we? I can ask you a question, Brie.
Okay. Any other favorites in there?
Well, there's a bunch of questions I want to answer, which are like, are there other practices or design and planning that work toward gender justice that we should know about? And like, who are your spiritual godmothers in the profession? Who are the foremothers of landscape architecture? Who do you look like when you started your career? So we could talk a little bit about that. Yeah, so many incredible women that I've had the great pleasure of working with and learning from, predominantly in academia. In academia, it seems to be a place where women leaders have been really grounded for a long time. So folks like Beth Meyer and Thaisa Way, and got so many, Dorothea and Bear, Sherry Fultonier, just these women leading academic institutions all around the country that are so impressive. And WXLA is really a place where we celebrate women who we think are running either in small practices or big practices, where they're leading practices, gender just workplaces, or where we think that we see them doing things that feel to us inspiring. And so if you go onto WXLA, you can scroll down and see that we had a bunch of highlights of kind of women-run businesses that were doing interesting things. And a lot of them were similar to us, mission-driven, really looking to do business differently in a way that really enabled more inclusion. I was going to say KDI is an interesting also kind of model for us, or
for gender
friend and partner.
Yeah. I think also, one person, not a woman, but Mitchell Silver, who is the commissioner of New York City's park system, is just an incredible person to follow. What he's been doing, both, in response to the racial justice movement, but even before that, about kind of neighborhood equity and investment in that city. So I think he's a consistent inspiration to us.
Yeah. We just talked about you ladies while you were gone. That was really rude that you left us here.
You had enough.
You're like, all right, enough about this. On to Friday night. Welcome back.
So sorry about that.
One of the originals, Beatrix Ferrand, designed Dumbarton Oaks. I think of Cornelia Oberlander, now in her late 80s, early 90s. My big brainstorm about when we were talking about inviting you all, I was thinking about, she just passed away in Boston.
Carol Johnson.
Carol Johnson.
Yeah, there's so many.
Yeah.
There's so many. Carol was such a guiding light for me. We went to the same undergraduate, and it was just, she ran this practice here in Boston that was just competing with men at a time when women weren't running practices like that, and just so fearless and
fearless, absolutely fearless.
Absolutely fearless, and just she's like, my favorite projects are the ones that get realized, and she's just unapologetically about making great public places. Yeah. Oh, you're muted again, Todd.
Jane Jacobs. I was telling some students that when we were doing urban redevelopment of the Union Station area, and so I got the wild idea to reread Death and Life of Great American Cities. And I said, well, I want to call Jane up. So I called Jane up and I said, would you come to Denver? And she said, well, I'm sure you'll do just fine without me. And she said, I'm in my 90s and I'm not traveling much anymore. But she was an amazing force.
Wow.
Up against, who, the power broker and Robert Moses.
Yeah. No, it's fascinating. I think, I was going to say, we've been talking a lot about what it means to be feminists in a way that also moves the goalpost a little bit further down the line of, and we talk about intersectionality, just the idea of broader inclusion. The feminist movement has a legacy of being exclusively white, female, led, and I think contemporary feminism is really interesting to us, and that it has a broader umbrella of civil rights and diversity, equity, inclusion that I think feels like a new space for a lot of practices to actually do some really innovative work. And so that's
even honoring people that two of my classmates, Perry Howard was the first Black president of ASLA, and Karen Phillips was a classmate of mine.
Yeah,
Karen decided to go to Harlem and work for the Abyssinian Church. She just won the IFLA medal. And, and when I approached her and I said, well, you really deserve this, Karen. Oh, no. It's getting them.
I'm just doing my work.
Yeah, it's just what I do.
Yeah, it's nice to see a lot of those greats finally getting the recognition they've so long deserved.
Yeah, principles above personalities is what I would say drove them. Yeah.
And I want to also add that it's been a lot. I've noticed a lot of work with the women in landscape architecture and WXLA doing some of that background foundational research and work to populate Wikipedia. And could you talk just a little bit more about some of the various projects that are happening to help spotlight women in landscape architecture?
Yeah, I mean, so just a 2-second thing on WXLA, we were just 4 women and 1 man who had all left really senior positions in really big firms. SWA, Sasaki, Design Workshop, West State, and had come to become friends to do a panel at the ASLA and recognize that a lot of the barriers we experienced, which a lot of women face everywhere, it's not those particular firms, but it's kind of the context of design culture, was problematic, and that there needed to be a kind of another kind of voice about what practice could be for women. And so we formed WXLA. We are really a guerrilla group. We have thousands of followers and we can't keep up with it most days. We make thousands of dollars in fundraising, which we have scholarships. We highlight women-run practices, but we're like doing this on our own time in like the wee hours of the night. So we welcome a lot of other groups that are doing mission-aligned work to take over our Instagram site and share their work. So the Wikipedia project is a passion project by another couple of women, Shira Grossman and Alexandra May, that they landed on our page. We have Black History Month takeovers. We have just women that are, there are a lot of women out there doing this work in quiet, like you said, principles about personality, doing this like inventorying of like where the women are in the profession that isn't being done by the ASLA just because they're interested. That's the Vila project. So we just tapped into something where we were like, okay, we can give them all a platform to share that information more openly. So it's been really nice. And it feels very feminist in that it is this kind of like loose women's march of a thing that people just sort of like feed into it ideas, and we're just there to receive it and shine it. Yeah. It's the short story.
That's awesome. And so Jamie Maslin Larson is an alumni of Utah.
That's right.
And then we also had Rebecca Leonard and Steven Spears on in December.
Bosses, all of them.
We're bringing in your whole crew. And
Yep. They're not a dry eye. They're just amazing. I'm so grateful. I'll say one other thing, which is that Brie and I were both principals at Sasaki, and being a woman, oftentimes a woman in the leadership in a firm like that, you're one of the only ones among a male cohort. For a long time, I was the only woman on the executive committee there and the only woman in the site principals group. And you don't even realize as it's happening that you've lost touch with your peers that are doing the same roles in other firms, because they become your competition in this funny way, and you don't really talk openly about what's happening. And so I think we've all felt liberated in this life to share really openly about some of those experiences. And we really encourage women just to, and men and people of color, just to share, to find that network and to share openly with your colleagues, even after you've, settled into different practices, because it's really helpful to have a cohort and a coalition that you can lean on for advice and share stories. Sorry, I could talk about that all night, but
I'm curious, for the students on the call who want to get involved in that, how can they do that?
I would say follow along on WXLA and sign up. We have a website. It's WXLANDSCAPE, so wxlandscape.org. And we have a sign up there where you can sign up and get our newsletters and see what materials we've done. We have a scholarship we give out every year to send women emerging leaders to the ASLA conference, all expense paid. So, and we have convenings there. So, and like I said, we're guerrilla, so we're lucky. I don't know what next month will bring. Thanks, Brie, some opportunistic moment of gathering. We're just about to publish this weekend. Keep your eyes open on World Landscape Architecture, a piece on gender just practice and what that looks like. And so that's just going to print this evening. So yeah, sort of follow along. And if you have an idea for a takeover, you guys want to do a Women of Utah Landscape Architecture, I'm here for it. I receive you.
We'll get started.
We already have that. It's called Willa. Yeah.
Yeah.
In fact, it's been active for about 10 years.
Yeah, we're not, see, the Willa groups are great and they're great contributors, but we're not affiliated with ASLA, so we have no boundaries. Yeah. We're not held down by any rules of etiquette.
Yes.
Can you send me one of those, please?
Yeah.
Did you see that? Brie? I think we just got feminist flashed.
One last question that kind of follows up on that. A student asked, who are some of the other firms that are addressing gender justice and other social justice issues that you would like to turn our students on to that they may not know about here in Utah?
Yeah, I mentioned it. We actually covered that, ladies, when you dropped off the line. But I didn't get to mention that
No.
We didn't get in depth. One of our favorites is Konkui. Have you guys seen Konkui Design Initiative? KDI, they're out of Los Angeles. They're good friends and collaborators. And they actually did a piece for the World Bank on gender and urbanism and making cities for women. They're just incredible thinkers. And if we can turn you on to anyone tonight, I would say check out their work. They're just doing really aspirational planning. What do you think, Brie?
Yeah, I was going to say too, one of the partners that we work with a lot is Stephen Gray, who is in a couple of our photos for engagement and collaboration. And his firm is called Grayscale Collaborative. And he's doing a lot of really interesting work with public realm activation and how to make these spaces more equitable. And so I think his work also really bridges engagement, equity, and place.
Mm-hmm.
Check out him.
Yeah, and I was just telling everyone to go check out WXLA, because we do feature a lot of women that are doing great work there, and both from a historic perspective, but also from a contemporary practice lens. Mm-hmm.
We get asked this question a lot too, I think, and oftentimes the names that come up are like KDI is a nonprofit, and so there's this kind of space occupied by firms that are wanting to do this work that are more in the nonprofit world, and then there's a segment too that are like us, still firms, but also kind of mission driven. So two different types or angles for check out for their own futures.
Well, a lot to follow up on. Well, I know I have a million more questions for you, but I want to be respectful of your time. And so I just want to thank you two for coming on and giving such an interesting and engaging talk and, responding to all of our questions. For everybody on the call, I just want to make a plug for the upcoming lectures that we're going to have.
And let's just also make a plug to these women because we used their image for our background.
Yeah.
Oh, look how cute, Brie. Isn't that great?
Love it. Yeah.
Everyone's an indie.
That's right.
We're in Indiana.
That's awesome.
So we'll be moving on to Anya Domleski, who's at SWA running their XL Innovation Lab, and she'll be with us on March 26th. And thank you again, Brie and Gina, so inspiring.
Thank you so much for having us, Todd. Nice to see you. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, thank you, Todd, for connecting us all so that we could get these lovely ladies here today.
It was a blast.
My
Have a great
pleasure.
weekend.
You guys are friends of Utah State forever.
Oh,
We've
good.
got a little house there called Canyon House that you can stay in whenever you're blasting through between.
Don't tempt Brie. She's got wanderlust.
I know.
During the rest of the pandemic, is that enough?
Thank you so much.
Have a great weekend, everyone. Thank you for coming.
Good night. Everybody have a good night.
Good night.